The job market has remained much stronger than a lot of economists predicted. And so that's kind of kept, to some degree, inflation a little higher than it should be. So inflation's still above 3% according to CPI. Fed wants to be back at 2%. So perhaps with the softening in the labor market, you'll see inflation start going down a little bit more. Obviously, the ideal for the Fed would be to have unemployment remain as low as possible while inflation moves down, but sometimes there's a trade-off of the two. So we'll just have to see how it shakes out the rest of the year.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, the Biden administration has really been touting jobs numbers. We've been looking very closely at that economic metric. What is the latest news on job openings?
Yeah, so the latest news on job openings is that they actually moved down to their lowest level since February of 2021. And the employment rate has remained positive throughout the past few years. Every month jobs are being added, so on and so forth. But slowly over the past year or two, the level of job openings has been coming down. Now it's not at like red alarm levels where we'd be freaking out saying the labor market's starting to crash, but it does show weakness in the labor market as the Fed keeps interest rates high. And with the Fed's higher interest rate target, it's kind of designed to soften the labor market and dampen demand so that inflation starts to move down. So it's kind of good news, but it's not good news for the job seekers who might be wanting to go out and get a job.
And it's sort of been the tension that policymakers have been dealing with, right? On the one hand, the jobs market, the labor market has been pretty resilient, but then also inflation has been pretty stubborn.
Yeah, correct. And they've been kind of working against each other because you got to see some sort of dampening in the labor market. And when the Fed first started raising interest rates, they warned we're going to see unemployment go up. It's natural. It's what we have to do in order to get price stability, inflation back under control. But the job market has remained much stronger than a lot of economists predicted. And so that's kind of kept, to some degree, inflation a little higher than it should be. So inflation's still above 3% according to CPI. Fed wants to be back at 2%. So perhaps with the softening in the labor market, you'll see inflation start going down a little bit more. Obviously, the ideal for the Fed would be to have unemployment remain as low as possible while inflation moves down, but sometimes there's a trade-off of the two. So we'll just have to see how it shakes out the rest of the year.
Senator Roger Wicker has an interesting proposal for the defense budget. What is it?
Yeah, it's a very hawkish defense proposal that would see U.S. defense spending actually go from just under 3% where it's at now to up to 5% of GDP. Be a huge, huge influx of funding for the Defense Department to the tune of, I think most estimates are somewhere between 5 and 6 trillion over the next decade. And there's some major issues with that. The big ones being deficits in the budgets right now. Right now, Republicans, and Wicker's a Republican, their big legislative priority heading into 2025 is extending the TCJA, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which it was
Trump's
passed.
tax cuts.
Trump's tax cuts, yes. And so those provisions are really costly. To extend those out basically prevents more revenue from coming in because you're keeping taxes low, so less tax revenues coming in. That's going to be a big price to pay for the budgets and deficit. So when you combine those two things, it would just be a huge fiscal, punch to the budgets and the deficits here in the U.S. So that I think it's going to be a heavy lift for Wicker to try to get this across the finish line. I spoke to a lot of economists and people in defense world, and a lot of them say, yes, we do need to bolster our defense capabilities, especially with adversaries like China and ongoing threats in the Middle East with countries like Iran. But there has to be a trade-off when it comes to the federal deficit and budget, because we can't just keep spending money and having no money come back in, because it's creating this fiscal cliff where it'd be really hard to get out of a few years from now.
And for a long time, people were pushing for 4%. So 5% is obviously it's a bigger number.
Yeah, you had groups like the Heritage Foundation, 4% for Freedom, people pushing for that. And, I think that the 5% is very aspirational. And in some ways, I think, absent the TCJA stuff, it's kind of seen as like a jumping off point for negotiation. So I think realistically, I was talking to someone, he thinks that the ideal number would be between 3 and 5%. So fall somewhere closer to 4%. But yeah, it would be very ambitious. And I don't think that it's a realistic number, though, in terms of the actual reality of the fiscal situation here in the U.S.
Trump's got all these Republicans, though, thinking of the art of the deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of deals to be made this year, and like I said with TCJA, there's this huge fiscal cliff, and it's going to be deal making nonstop come the new year.
All right, we've got to go shopping and looking for deals. Thank you,
That's
Zach.
right.
You could read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.